I'd like to welcome you back to At Home in Bethel Park. My name is Judy Scheidler, and I will be your host today. I am with Northwood Real Estate Agency, and today I have several panel members with me from other agencies in Bethel Park area. Today, for our roundtable discussion, we will be discussing buyer agency. With us today is Tracy Janoff of Prudential Preferred Realty, Darlene Kruth with Northwood Realty, Casey Kuzel with Caldwell Banker, and Roxanne Agustinella with Keller Williams. We'd like to get right into our topic today because we have so much to cover. And I think I'd like to start it with a consumer notice. Whenever we have a new buyer come to us who is looking to purchase a home, we have an obligation to explain to them what our role will be in their transaction. And the state requires us to give every buyer a consumer notice. Just out of curiosity, have any of you ever talked to a buyer who's worked with other agents who haven't given a consumer notice?
Absolutely, yes.
What's the first thing you say to them? Do you explain to them why that agent didn't do what they needed to do? Do you ever take the time, Darlene, do you ever take the time to explain to somebody how important it is for them as a buyer to read this consumer notice?
Absolutely, and the first thing that I explain to them, Judy, is that it's not a contract. It basically just spells out for a buyer the different ways that an agent can represent you in a transaction. The most common way would be as a buyer's agent in their case. Mm-hmm. And it basically lays out, as a buyer's agent, your responsibility to the seller and, on the other side of the transaction. So I do explain to them, that it's very important. But the first thing I do say is that it's not a contract. It's just an explanation.
Have any of you encountered anybody who has been reluctant to sign this?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of them.
What do you say to them, Casey? Do you explain this isn't for us? You're not making a fiduciary arrangement here with me.
Sure, absolutely. I think there's just such a fear as to being committed to something when you just walked in the door, you don't know this person, and you want to get to know each other's personality to make sure that you guys are a good fit together. We just kind of sit down and go over, this is not a contract, but I want to make sure that you have some sort of representation along this process because it's so important. We're talking finances. So it matters tremendously that they are protected as the buyers. Otherwise, we are, considered the listing agents, and that's where our fiduciary responsibility lies. That's important.
That's exactly correct, because if you don't have a buyer agency agreement with someone and they don't want to sign a buyer agency agreement, then you work for the seller by default.
Exactly.
Tracy, do you ever explain that the state of Pennsylvania requires this for a reason?
I always do. I explain to everybody that we need to lay out for you what our job is for you and how we can represent you. And there's a myth out there, especially with the mothers and dads, grandmas and grandpas, that you're only working for the seller. And I think that myth with our consumer notice relates to them and shows them that this is how we are working for you. And yes, even though we get paid by the seller, we are not working for the seller. That we are working for you exclusively.
And the seller agrees to this because when we do listings now, we have them sign a dual agency consent.
Mm-hmm. And buyer agency is fairly new in the state of Pennsylvania. It's a decade plus old. So when you're dealing with elderly sellers, they're often not aware of a buyer agency in the transaction. So they need to understand that, it's very important that they understand their rights with regards to a real estate transaction in the state of PA, and that's all part of our job, when we first have that initial meeting.
I agree. Roxanne, whenever you're talking to a buyer about your listing, because you have a lot of listings, and you all have a lot of listings, and you bring in that buyer, they can contact you over the internet or however, you explain to them dual agency. How do you explain dual agency as opposed to buyer agency?
Well, dual agency is when, in Keller Williams Realty, we are allowed to act as dual agents at our organization, how I explain it to them is I basically represent both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. And they often have questions as to how that works. And I say legally I cannot disclose any confidential information on the seller's part and also on the buyer's part in this transaction. That's how I legally explain it to them. And I also say if you're not comfortable with the situation, they have a right to go out and have their own representation, you know, being represented by a buyer's agent.
Other than yourself. When you're doing dual agency, Darlene, do you run into sellers, even after they sign the dual agency agreement, who feel maybe they want to change their mind about that? Have you ever run into that?
I can't really say that I have, and I've actually, in the time that I've been in the business, I've served as a dual agent probably maybe on one transaction a year. So that's how infrequent it actually is. For an agent to actually serve as the dual agent, as opposed to the more common situation where the brokerage is serving as the dual agent.
Right.
Whereas it's my listing, but say you bring me a buyer. Well, Northwood Realty in that case is the dual agent, not you or not I. That's the more common scenario for dual agency.
Actually, though, don't we have the same fiduciary services as though we were the dual agent, if it's with the broker? So we can't disclose, we can't counsel one more than another. Do you feel people are comfortable with that type of agency in your office? But you know, you're with Prudential. You offer another type of agency. You offer. Go ahead.
What we offer is designated agency, and I think our brokerage is the only one that has the true designated agency. What we have done is we've
The only one that's represented here.
The only one that's represented here. I'm sorry, yes.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. And what we have done is our secretaries are not allowed to handle the sellers and the buyers. We have two different faxes so that if an offer comes in, only the secretary can see that, so that none of the other agents are allowed to do that. We do, if we have Prudential to Prudential, Prudential is the dual agency, but the agents are the designated agents.
The agents are the designated
Yes.
agents. So if somebody wants designated agency and they come to you and you have the seller and the buyer, your broker refers the buyer to another agent within your
Yes,
firm.
absolutely.
Okay. Just wanted to be
Absolutely.
clear
Sorry
on how
about
that
that.
worked. There's also another little tricky little thing, and some brokerages do it, some shy away from it just because it can present a lot of its own unique problems, but it's called transactional licensee. And are any of you familiar with just doing the paperwork on a deal?
Yes.
No.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
Can
I
you tell
just
me about
recently did a lease purchase contract. It was a previous seller of mine who had a renter, out-of-state seller, had a renter in his house in Upper St. Clair, and the renter could not purchase right now. So they approached me to do a lease purchase contract, and in that case, just a small fee was agreed upon in order to do the paperwork. So our office, Keller Williams, does allow transactional licensee. In that case, it's called a transactional licensee.
This is going to be where I said sometimes we're going to segue to different things. You did a lease purchase. How different is that from a land contract?
So, similar to a land contract, the renter has the a year option to purchase the house, and they are paying rent, and then a certain amount of money goes towards their down payment if they do decide to purchase. So,
Okay. So this is what rent to own. A lot of people would
Correct.
refer to the rent to
yes, right.
own. Just real quickly, because this is really kind of an interesting thing, and this is not on our notes, but land contracts, real quick. What do you see your role if you're an agent and writing a land contract? How do you see yourself proceeding with a land contract now? In a land contract, we know the seller holds the deed in escrow. The deed's not registered anywhere. The seller has the ability to use that property in any way, shape, or form legally that they want to. Do you ever offer alternatives? But in this economy, sometimes there aren't a lot of alternatives. Casey?
That's a tough one. I mean, that's really tough. I mean, it's a sticky situation. I think at the end of the day, interest rates are so low. I mean, you have to capitalize on that. We don't know what next year's going to bring, but we do know right now we're at record low. If there's a way to find them the perfect lender to mesh them with something that's rock solid, it's going to ensure their future and their security. But I mean, yeah, there's different situations for everybody. I mean, nothing's the same.
Have any of you seen, like the last time we had this kind of real estate economy back in the mid-'80s? We saw a lot of land contracts. Have you seen any?
I have not.
There's a lot of the groups that are out there that are selling the rent-to-owns or whatever, and what they're doing is they're doing a land contract plus they're doing a lease, so that if they default on the land contract, then it'll just revert into a lease for them.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's a very sticky situation, though.
That would be more to protect a seller, though, than a buyer.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's not protecting the buyer at all.
Okay. And you're right. The interest rates are pretty low. You know, maybe if somebody can't qualify at this rate, they should be thinking about putting aside a few more dollars for the future. Since I kind of brought us into the to the realm of financing and pre-approval, let's just kind of move right over into that. We all know how important it is to get a pre-approval. What do you consider the best type of pre-approval? What would you say would be a gold standard for a pre-approval from a certain lender, a certain absolutely no problem? How do you take your pre-approvals to a seller? How do you present it with your offer so that your seller knows that it's a great deal? Casey?
Well, I think the pre-approval letter is key. You could get them anywhere online, but the fact of the matter is you want to do your research prior to getting that offer and finding that house of your dreams. So doing your homework prior to is extremely important. With the different kinds of loans, as a seller, it matters tremendously if you have a buyer that's putting a conventional 20% down or is in an FHA loan that has a different kind of appraiser in different circumstances that we're going to have to go through as the process continues in our different 45 to 65-day turnaround.
So you would think that if you got a pre-approval on a conventional loan, you know that your buyer is going to be putting down 20%. You think that that's a better,
Absolutely.
Heavier weighted? Go ahead.
And I think also the key is to work with a local lender as a buyer. Work with someone they can meet with face-to-face. I can't stress how crucial that is in the whole scheme of going to the closing. I have had some issues. I didn't represent the buyer. I had the seller represent the seller, and the buyers weren't dealing with a local lender. And it creates a myriad of different problems. So you have to be able to meet face-to-face with your lender and deal locally. We have plenty of very good options, here in the South Hills.
And I agree. We absolutely have some really, really great mortgage companies and banks. Darlene, whenever you get a pre-approval, what do you look for the bank to say on that pre-approval? Not necessarily a dollar figure, but if you're looking at a buyer, would you be looking for anything specific on the pre-approval?
Well, one of the things I look for is a lot of times they'll make a notation as to the maximum monthly payment or the maximum dollar value of the home that this buyer can pursue. And a lot of times the first thing I want to do is clarify with the buyer that is that the lender's recommendation or did you impose a constraint? Did the lender come to you and say you can afford a $200,000 house, but you told the lender you don't want to overbuy, you want to look at something in the $125,000 to $150,000 range? Because that'll give me a gauge that if we are looking in the range that they want to look at, but if something pops a little bit higher that piques their interests, that we're not out of bounds. So that's one of the things that I look for to clarify.
And when you're talking to your buyer about their pre-approval, how do you explain to them that a pre-approval for $125,000 is going to buy a nice home? I mean, you can get in the South Hills a very nice home, but it's you have to factor in insurance. If it's FHA, you have to factor in PMI, and you have to factor in taxes. Do your buyers grasp that? Do they understand about PMI, Tracy?
I would think in the beginning they don't. I think that's where we have to sit down and we have to educate them with that. One of the loans I think that we all not shy away from, but we don't know as much about is the government loans. Okay, my husband's been in the military for 32 years, just retired, and I know that a lot of people where I've worked, they're like, oh, VA loans are so hard to do, and they're not really. So I will ask somebody, you know, have you ever been in the military? It's amazing how many of our service people who were retired or whatever, they don't even know about government loans.
And government loans, you don't, no matter, you can get it zero down and no PMI.
Right.
You know, and that's a big deal.
Right now, there's a company out there called the Navy Federal Credit Union, and a lot of people don't know, but the government employees can get it, and it's zero down. There's no points. It's a special loan that's out there, and what they will do, because I sign up for all the military, you know, ones, and what they will do is they'll run a special for like a month. And what I'll do is go out to, you know, somebody that might be looking, and I'll say, this might be the time you want to do it right now, because there's a difference of $25 to $30 a month in their payments when they run those specials.
Absolutely. You know what, Roxanne, we've been talking about PMI. I bet there's a lot of buyers who don't know what PMI is.
Right.
Do you want to give
It's basically mortgage insurance the bank charges if the buyer is not has 20% equity into the purchase. They have to pay an additional fee that is not tax deductible. So that's, again, the benefit of putting, you know, if you can afford to put 20% down, it erases your PMI. But it's insurance for the bank. If the buyer were to default, that money goes towards, you know, basically the equity that they have in their house.
And I think that there was a misunderstanding with buyers about PMI insurance when we recently went through this crash in the real estate market. They thought, well, we have PMI insurance. PMI insurance is not covering anybody's loan. It's barely covering the cost of banks to recover their loss on legal fees and so forth. So the PMI insurance is not guaranteeing against your default. It's guaranteeing that the bank will have resources enough to recover on the property.
On the buyer's default.
On the buyer's default, yes, thank you. So the PMI is going to be applied unless it's a VA loan or unless it's a conventional with 20% down. You're going to be looking at a PMI on your loan, which to a lot of people it allows them to get into a higher house, a higher valued house that they can afford, but you will be looking at $40, $50 a month in PMI insurance. It gets escrowed out of each payment that you make.
And Judy, one of the things that I do explain to my buyers too is that as you're making that monthly mortgage payment, when you do reach that 80-20 equity split, that PMI, that piece of your monthly payment will go away.
Not automatically.
You
have to contact the bank's not going to start giving you back money.
Right. If you're aware, if you are keeping track of your payments and you know when you've hit that 80-20 split, then you can request that it.
And that's
be
the key.
removed.
You have to, the owner has to call up the bank and say,
Right.
there's stipulations or caveats on all of that too. Like they say you have to have your mortgage in
5
good
years.
standing.
Right.
Right.
Or-
Never be late.
It's 5
5
years.
years.
It's 5
Right.
years. I didn't know the time frame. No, it has to be in good standing. And
Most of the loans right now, you've had to have had your loan for 5 years, and then be in good standing, and you can get rid of your 20%
Right.
or your PMI.
But even, I think that there was like a little bit of a court discussion not so long ago in Pennsylvania about this because the banks were very reluctant to let go of that PMI insurance even after that 20% was met. And there's a whole criteria that the state put out that puts the onus on the homeowner to contact all of the mortgage company and people to do that. But that's a good point. Get that 20% equity and start canceling out that PMI insurance. Now, when you've got your pre-approval on your buyer and you know what area they're in, how do you get them started on their search? Do you send them driving around neighborhoods, or do you send them, Darlene, how did you send them links on?
Basically, I set up a search in the multi-list system for them, an automatic email search that they would get on a daily basis once we discuss the parameters of what they're looking for.
Okay.
I input that into the system. They get an initial push from the search. It could be anywhere from 20 to 50 homes based on the parameters that they've set. And I basically just instruct them to look through the pictures, look through the information. Feel free to go do a drive-by, through the neighborhood if you're not familiar with it, especially for someone that's moving here from out of town, that really has no idea where they want to live. All they know is, I'm going to be working in the city, and I just don't know which direction to go. So I basically just tell them to look at the pictures, do the drive-bys, give me a call if there's anything that piques your interest. Because for some buyers I've found lately, they're really interested in yards. They want property, they want land, and they want a nice backyard. And I've lived in Pittsburgh all my life. Your backyard is either a hillside going up or a hillside going down. To find flat property is a real challenge. So I say to them, if the yard is that important to you, please go drive by the property. Because if the yard does not meet your needs, you're not really going to have much interest in wanting to see the inside of the house.
Inside of the house, you're right.
So that's usually where I start.
And that's a good place to start. Roxanne, have you ever sent a list out to your buyers and they've come back to you and they have the 20 houses, they want to see 18?
Yes, that has happened. It's our job really to try to get them, if there's 18, okay, give me your top 10. We can see 10 in a day, and it is not confusing for the buyers. They don't get confused. I try to get a top 10 list, like David Letterman, kind of top 10. But also, I work with buyers that are maybe even 6 months out from buying. We had mentioned the property search. I set them up on the search right away because it also gives them an education as to price for the neighborhoods, the activity on the market, so on and so forth. So not only when we meet them, but I know probably all of us have buyers that aren't quite ready to buy right now, but they are getting these property searches right away, just really for an education as to know what they can afford and
where they want to
right,
go.
Yeah.
Do you find, Tracy, that when your buyer comes to you and they have 20 properties they want to see, do you initially say, okay, we'll see them, or do you say, let's really see what your need list versus your want list versus your wish list? Because they all have, I have them, you have, we have needs, wants, and wishes.
Well, what I try and do is I go through all of them with them, and I tell them, send me the properties that you're looking at. And then I'll say, what is, your top 10 or 12 that we can see that day. And when we get back, usually what I'll do is say, let's look at these other ones. Now, this one doesn't have, you said you really wanted a yard. This one is telling you, a hilly, it won't say hilly yard, but it'll say small yard. Okay. This, you wanted a large kitchen. Here's one that has a 9x10 kitchen. Do you really want to go see that one? Okay. This one has aluminum siding. You really wanted brick. Can we, maybe take that one out? And I think at first everybody wants to see everything, and then I think that's when you can narrow them down a little bit.
Have you, Casey, had buyers just get totally, and this has been a mistake that I personally have made in the past. I have said, okay, we'll go look, because I love looking at houses. I just love it. I love seeing what's on the market and knowing what we have to offer. But I've made mistakes where I haven't sat down and had that conversation where we restrict the list and look at our needs, wants, and wishes. When you get a buyer that's getting overloaded because they're getting too much information,
Absolutely.
how do you handle it?
Yeah, I mean, there is such a thing as overload. I do have to say the internet is fantastic. I feel like buyers right now are extremely educated when they come to us, that it's truly our job to start this relationship with them. And I feel like that's what we hold and we bring to the table as agents, because we get to, even if we are driving out to see 10 houses, it's not to me about seeing those 10 houses, it's about me spending time with my clients and getting to know their wish list. Because once, we don't know what we want. But as agents, we could kind of weed through that and say, okay, I hear you were telling me about this cooking, so obviously, red flag that the kitchen is the most important thing to you, because you're telling me this is how you spend your time. And it's the relationship that kind of dictates the way they live their life. It's the husband saying, hey, all I do is spend my time outside. And once you establish that friendship and you really get to know your clients and the buyers, it's really easy to weed through that 10 list Because truly, once we know what they're looking for, it's really a matter of 2 houses. Granted, we will see, granted we'll spend the time to show them all 10 if that's, something that's important to them. But, it's real easy as agents to see where their priorities are and which is going to work for them.
Have you ever had a buyer who's put an offer in on the house and their multi-list notification is still running, and you've sent that offer in on that house, and the next morning they get the property, the new one, just on the market that they absolutely need to see? How do you explain to them that you've got an offer on the table? It's not accepted, so you really can go ahead and show properties to them legitimately. Roxanne?
Yeah, absolutely. And, until they're happy with their decision, I'll show them that dream property, because unless it's accepted, the offer is accepted, it's not an executed contract, meaning the buyer and the seller have signed the contract. The flip side is, with inspections, they still have to go to inspection on that property, so you do want to have backup properties in case something would happen on their first choice. It's nice to have a backup. So until they are closed on the sale, really, quite frankly, our contracts are structured in the state of PA that gives the buyer the edge in terms of the ability to, get out of contract if they choose to do so.
There are a lot of contingencies. There are, and there are for the seller, there are for the buyer, and there's advantages on both sides. But have you ever had a buyer, Darlene, that took a second property over a first after you put an offer in?
I'm trying to think. I don't think that I have, but at the same time, I don't shut my system searches off until the day of closing. Until we've closed the deal. What I find more frequent, and especially since the spring market kicked up, is my buyers are in multiple offer situations on regular properties as opposed to foreclosure, properties, which is a common occurrence for foreclosures, but on regular properties. And they get, especially the first-time home buyers, get really frustrated with losing that deal. And I've had some buyers go to the table 3 times before they get the house, and I basically just try to counsel them and say, things happen for a reason, and they couldn't be happier when it's all said and done that the third house was really the house they should have had. But they don't realize that when they get the rejection from the first house and the second house.
Right. But I do find that my buyers, whenever we come into that situation, they usually are very happy with their final choice. Things really do happen for a reason. I really believe that, and I think that most people end up where they really want to be. And this has been a half hour already, so we're gonna break it here and start back up again on our next show with the continuation of the buyer agency discussion and how your real estate agents in our area can help you with your home purchase. And I would like to say thank you to Tracy Janoff from Prudential, to Darlene Cruz from Northwood, to Casey Kuzel from Caldwell Banker, and to Roxanna Castanella from Keller Williams. And my name is Judy Scheidler, and I will see you next time on At Home in Bethel Park.
I've always appreciated the American Legion.
My gratitude to the American Legion.
Thank you all of the American Legion.
Well, we have millions of veterans that are members of our organization.
Thank you.
The American Legion, celebrating a legacy of service to America. Find out more at legion.org.